Good afternoon, everybody. Sean Wilkes here, product evangelist for the Invenias product in the Bullhorn portfolio. We've got a few people still dropping into the session, so we'll get things underway fairly shortly. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Richard Watson and Neil Clevitt, who some of you will know as they may well be your account managers, we'll be fielding questions designed to be a bit of an interactive session today. So we'll be fielding questions throughout today's session. Raise your hand and we should be able to unmute you, but you can also use the Q&A function in here. Richard and Neil are going to monitor that for me and kind of raise stuff that may be appropriate. So as was outlined in the we are recording today's session as well, by the way, so we can circulate the recording after the session. But so as was outlined in the registration page in the email that we sent out, and the registration page that directed you to, today's session is pitched at those who've mastered the default dashboards. Our default dashboards work out of the box with certain fixed data sets. We hope to be able to answer some of the questions you might have today around what do I do next. I think analytics product is a great way to visualize and work with talent intelligence and business information, business metrics from your database. But you know, where you're capturing the data, what insights you're trying to draw from it, will likely always require some degree of custom work. I'm planning on demonstrating some of the possibilities today, some of what can be achieved with more advanced custom dashboards and what that can bring to your business. We'll also explore best practice around data capture, around some of those concepts, some of those prototypes, how you know, some changes in the way that you capture the data might well impact the complexity of any custom project. And we'll review, as I said, a number of prototype dashboards. There is going to be an opportunity throughout today's session as we show stuff for you to ask questions and for you to provide some input and some direct feedback. You know, and that might be more around, well, we're capturing that data in this format instead. How do we work with that? Some of those questions we don't want to get into too much detail on today, but we'll tackle what we can. But it is designed to be an interactive session, so feel free to kind of raise your hands in the session, and we've got a little button here that we can push to allow people to talk, or if you'd rather just drop the questions into the Q&A section. Okay, so raise and lower hands, Q&A on the toolbar inside the GoToWebinar session here. So the agenda, I'm going to run through the new defaults. We've shipped and deployed a number of new default dashboards, replacing the old ones. Those defaults were made uneditable deliberately so that we could ship periodically, ship updates to them. I'm going to talk to that a little bit. Some of those default dashboards have data sets that on certain databases are too large. So we'll talk a little bit about our plans to introduce some date filters to those. I'll direct you towards our Did You Know content in the Help Center. We're adding content there all the time, but most recent stuff in there relates to analytics specifically. Then we'll look at these prototypes. We're going to go through the billing by user, so looking at the fee allocations, the fee splits component, a dashboard, a prototype dashboard, to visualize data that you're capturing around data privacy events, the history that you have on individuals if you're tracking GDPR or CCPA. We'll take a look at a dashboard for tracking movers. This is people job changes, essentially, using that work history, the position history in a person record. We'll take a look at then a couple of extra layers of data around user activity. Our defaults include a basic user activity dashboard, and obviously each of the individual dashboards around meetings and interviews gives you a bit more granularity in each of those action types. We're going to take a look at a couple of different variations on that with prototypes around an assignment activity dashboard and a programs activity dashboard. And then at the end, we'll kind of circle back and try and cover a little bit in the definition of custom data sets and how you might engage in projects around getting a custom kind of dashboard built. So as I said, we're focusing today on those who've mastered the defaults. The defaults are clearly documented in the Default Analytics Dashboard Help Center article. Here you can learn about each of those dashboards, what data is displaying, what filters are applied in different widgets in the dashboard. There's also a link in here. You'll see the Working with Analytics section here in the Help Center article. It takes you through to another area where you can learn a little bit about applying filters to the entire data set, to just individual widgets. And there's also an article in here that talks about the creating and editing 3 dashboards, and walks you through the process of building a dashboard from the ground up using those default data sets. So Help Center article there that's definitely worth kind of familiarizing yourself with if you're trying to work out where you go next. In Did You Know, in the Help Center, there is a channel there that allows us to present videos in a kind of a show reel format. We embed our Help Center videos either inside an article, frame it, or we use this channels feature. And the Did You Know channel has articles on off limits and all sorts of other features, but the most recent set that have been added in here relate to and complements that Working with Dashboards article. Talks about how to add filters, how to use the card widget, for instance, to display counts of information. The 3 main dashboards that we see that struggle most because of the volume of data on a lot of the larger databases are the assignment forecast, the assignment billing, and the billing by user data sets. So our plan over the next probably next quarter, next 3 months, is to take some of those defaults and adjust a hard-coded date filter. So some of these data sets in analytics are already limited to 12 months, and those we might extend to a longer time frame because they don't give you enough. But some have such large data sets that it takes a long time for the dashboard to load, and then in some cases the volume of data gets to a point where it simply times out and won't load. So we're looking at probably introducing a last 3 years filter on those data sets, the forecasting one, the billing one, and the billing by user. So my first question for the group here is, does anybody see any challenges with that? Would anybody have any problems with us imposing a 3-year or a 4-year date limit on the assignment forecast data set? So it's only going back to the assignments created in the last 3 years. Ditto with billing and billing by user. Doesn't mean you can't access the data further back than that, but it would require custom work. We'll give people a moment in here to okay, raise their hands if they have an issue. But Chloe's got her hand up. Oh, wrong one. No, hands down again. Okay. Oh, Millie's got a hand up. Okay, Millie, you should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, hello.
Oh, hello, hi. If an assignment didn't have a forecast date in it, would it not show up?
Yeah, it will. It doesn't display in the widgets that show by date, because the widget that has the bar graph by date uses the forecast date field. The data will still be in the data set. So if you're changing the default dashboard to not use the forecast date, but instead to use date created, it will be the date created that will apply the filters to in here. Okay. Great. Okay, so let's move on. Prototype demos. I'm going to talk through a number of these things. Some of these prototypes use pretty simple custom data sets or simply represent the data from one of our default data sets in slightly different ways. And if that's the case, in some instances, we may decide to ship this as a default, as a new default, based on some of the feedback that we get today. That may or may not happen fairly quickly. But there is also a Help Center article called Other Analytics Dashboards in our Help Center. This shows you how you can go about importing a dashboard using the XML files that we create to that basically give you the core template for a dashboard. You click the new button, you then click the import button. And at the bottom of this article are a series of files that you can download. That's the XML file that you import. Okay. So, based on the feedback we get today, and some of the dashboards that I'm showing you today, the data privacy one, for instance, and the fee splits one, those files are already in here. Okay. As I said, this is designed to be an interactive session. So, the feedback we get from this group will help us work out whether we just put files in here for people to download, or whether there's a standard enough fixed confined data set that we can use to deploy this as a dashboard that will work for everybody without any customizations, in which case we can potentially look at pushing it as an additional default on top of the ones that we deployed most recently. So let's take a look first at assignment billing by user. This is a fee splits dashboard. So this uses the billing events, but it also combines that with the fee allocations in the team tab. So if we jump into an assignment record and we open the team tab here, when I select a team member, see the panel on the right hand side loads and allows me to define either a simple fee allocation or an advanced fee allocation. The simple one applies a fixed percentage to each billing event. So if I put 20 in there, you'll notice that it calculates 20% of all the billing events is £10,000. Okay, so this is calculating based on the sum of the values of all of the billing events, and it's taking 20% of that and giving that 20% to a team member. The advanced one allows you to allocate a different split to each team member. The third section in here is currently in development. This allows you to differentiate between origination, conversion, and execution. So is this person getting a sales split and a delivery split, or just a sales split? So this is a feature that may well be introduced in the next release. So keep an eye out on the release notes for that. That gives you the ability to say, well, this person is getting 50% of the sales split and 50% of the execution split. And you can see there, it again calculates what's 50% of the total billing amount in here. Okay. This bottom section here is a slightly different data set sat behind it. These top two sections are both represented in the default dashboard data set that I've used to build this dashboard. So if I go into edit mode, click on the menu icon at the top and click data sources, you'll see it says assignment billing by user. If you click add in here, you'll see a set of standard default data sets available to analytics. That is one of them. Okay, so I'm just showing you here a dashboard that is a different representation or is using a default data set, even though we haven't shipped it at this stage as a default dashboard. There's a couple of reasons for that. When you're looking at this data set, each billing event is repeated for every single team member in the assignment. So what you will end up with, if you're not careful, is when you're adding up the values or you're counting items, you could end up counting items twice. Okay. The way we get around that in here is when we're representing data in a widget, for instance, the billing amount widget here, rather than using the sum of all the billing events related to this assignment, we are using the minimum. Okay, doesn't really matter whether you use min, max, or average, because we're showing a row for every billing event. But that billing event will be repeated in this data set multiple times for each team member, whether they have a split or not. So if you just add up the sum of all billing events, it's gonna double, triple, quadruple, depending on whether there's 2, 3, or 4 team members. If you use the min summary type here, it will only select the minimum of those values, which will be the same as the average and the max, because essentially the value can't be different for each team member. But just something to be mindful there is, in these data sets, sometimes the rows of data repeat. And as a consequence, you've got to think about that when you're defining the requirements for the data set, if you're looking at a custom work, but also for visualizing that data. The other option that we have in here is we've used a distinct count. So rather than counting the number of items, it's counting the number of items as long as they are distinct. So in this particular case, we're counting the ID of the team member, but we're only counting it once for each row. So in here, you'll see the count is showing up as 5 here. So there are 5 team members in this assignment. If I didn't select distinct in here and I just put count, it might well show multiples. It'll show 20 if there are a number of other billing events, for instance, being represented in the data set. So the count distinct versus count, the min versus the sum. If you're just using the sum item in these fields, you have to be careful because you may be counting certain items multiple times. Okay, just something to think about, and that's why we've done that in here. We've also applied a little bit of conditional formatting to some of the fields in here. This is, again, with the fee split specifically, we're adding up all the fee splits. And we've done the conditional formatting in here just to show you where more than 100% has been allocated, or where less than 100% has been allocated, or where there's nothing. So we've set some conditional formatting rules in here around the sum of splits, for instance. So if we select sum of splits, you see we've got a number of conditional formatting rules in here that will apply a different color in that field based on different conditions. Because we don't impose those restrictions in the product, we have to visualize that somehow in the dashboards. That gives us the ability then to kind of visualize that with some conditional formatting rules. Okay, so but ultimately this is displaying fee splits. It's displaying the splits for each user. It's got, as our new defaults do, it's got some fields in here that show you which assignments have no billing event, have no due dates on them, for instance, which billing events have no due dates, which assignments have no team members. There's some basic stuff in here that might be useful, but yeah, I think any questions on the fee splits dashboard? Any of you using the fee allocations functionality, but not currently extracting that data in any way? There is a hand raise here, Chloe. Allowed to talk. Yep, you should be able to unmute, Chloe. How are you?
So a couple of questions. One was kind of your question around accessing the default dashboards before you went into the fee splits and this dashboard. I think the main kind of element of feedback I'd have on that at the moment is actually when you're in the analytics environment and navigating between the different dashboards and having full visibility of those that are live, open existing, that environment for me is a little kind of clunky at the moment. And that's, I mean, my personal opinion at the moment on this would be that you leave them as it is now and we choose what we suck up in terms of the default dashboards and data sets, because it can get
adding
quite
more manageable. Yeah, adding more just clutters it. Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. Yep.
And actually in managing those different dashboards, it'd be quite nice to be able to archive. I know we can export them out, but just navigating that in terms of other people accessing it, I find it a bit.
Yeah, it's a unique issue for systems administrators because only the admins see everything.
Right.
The other users only see the dashboards you've shared with them.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do is obviously take links to these dashboards. Each dashboard has its own unique, and build that into, you know, some of our clients have built that into apps in Teams, for instance. They've added it as an app in Teams, or they've, you know, they've kind of stored those links elsewhere, or just bookmark them in their own browsers. But yeah, it's a fair point.
Cool. So the other comment on the billing dashboard, I know we have weighting against the assignment, kind of the whole value of the assignment and forecasted weighting there. Is there any plans to incorporate weighting against individual billing events?
I mean, it already exists. Are you talking about combining the two things though? The assignment weighting being applied to the billing events?
No, specifically the billing events.
Okay. There's a column in the billing grid called weighting, which is a field that you can add a weighting on an individual billing event.
Okay, I couldn't see it in the system preferences. Okay, I'll have a play around.
Yeah, it's in the column chooser in billing. You see here I've got weighted billing amount and weighting. The weighting column allows you to add a weighting in this grid, and the weighted billing amount will then apply that weighting to the total to give you a weighted version. And those weighted billing event values are in our default data sets.
Okay, cool. Okay.
There just aren't that many people weighting individual billing events because of the extra work involved in putting it in here. One thing I'm looking at doing is getting the assignment weighting added to the billing event data set so that you could, in theory, use that to weight all of the billing events, and apply some rules around maybe not weighting billing events that already been billed, for instance. Just ignore that and create a calculated field that would multiply the weighting on the assignment by the values. But yeah, there is a weighting and a weighted billing event in the grid, in the billing tab. Cool.
Okay. And in terms of is the kind of conversion back to base rate in all the data sets as well?
Yeah, exactly. So there'll be a weighted billing event in the local currency and a weighted in the base currency.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Any other questions about the fee split stuff specifically before we move on to the next one? Magali. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. You can unmute yourself, Magali. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, maybe I missed it, but how can you see the split for conversion or origination or execution in the dashboard?
It's not in the dashboard because it's a separate data set and it's not available yet. It's being shipped in maybe this month's or next month's release. So on the team tab here, this section, it has to be enabled in systems preferences, but you won't see the setting and the feature in systems preferences until you get the latest release with this feature included. If you want a dashboard built that consumes this data rather than one of these two fee splits, that will have to be a custom data set.
Oh.
We haven't got a default dashboard, but I can quite easily, once the data is available to everybody, quite easily take what we have in here as a fee splits dashboard and just repoint all of these widgets of that new data set, but it's just not available for everybody yet. So I'll take that as an action, Magali, but yeah, in systems preferences, once it's available, you go options, systems preferences, and once it's available in the billing tab in here, you'll see an extra option that allows you to enable origination, conversion, execution splits. And there will be a new abstraction layer table with that data in it. It would have been too complicated for us to include that in the existing data tables.
Okay, thank you. When is it available? Sorry.
I think it made it in this release. I think this feature, I mean, if you,
it should be short. Yep.
Yeah, which goes out next week to GA. So once you get the next update, you go to the billing and invoicing tab, you'll see this new setting in systems preferences. You can enable this, and then you will see the extra section in the billing tab. Between now and then, I'll repoint the fee splits dashboard to the new data set that is sat behind that, but no one's going to have any data in it at the moment. in those fields. So, but I'll make that available in the other dashboards help center article.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So let's move on to data privacy, everyone's favorite topic. But I think a useful, an interesting use case here for dashboards that visualize the data in a different way to the way that we do in the product. Obviously, in the product, we've got these grids. In the case of the people grid, you can bring in consent status, lawful basis, purpose, consent term, and consent expiry columns. This doesn't show you when consent was requested, for instance. It doesn't show you who requested it. So what we've solved for with this particular dashboard is pulling that data and visualizing it in slightly different ways. This shows you a list of all the people in the database with the most recent event in their event history. So if that was informing them under legitimate interest or seeking consent or them approving consent, that history shows up in here. But it also shows us the date it was the last event happened. The event type is in here, which is basically that consent status column that you can see in the people grid, pretty much aligns to that. But also who did it, so you can start to see who's taking action. And these dashboards have been built with filters in, so I can see Pete Hersey is the most busy person in our team, a few in 2019, but the bulk of his activity was in 2020. So yeah, the data privacy dashboard solves for a slightly different use case here, right? We're looking at, especially because you can't search the event history in our advanced search, we're looking at visualizing that data in slightly different ways. So anybody have any questions on this one? This dashboard is also available in that other dashboards help article. Magali, allowed to talk.
Thank you, Sean. Is it possible to see, to view one by one, person by person, who sent, or who is the user of the event?
Yes, yes. So each of these rows just shows you the name of the person, but behind the data behind this person is this user. So, you know, if I select Peter in here, we will see this row, this grid here filters to show me the people he has been handled. We can turn this grid into a filter as well, or we can add a search box in here that allows you to, it's timed out because I've had it open too long now, but or we can add a interesting, someone doing something with my database maybe. Refresh this. And take that again. Yeah, so I mean, would it be useful to have a search box to search for the name of a person? Would it be useful to have the grid that has the names of people in it operate as a filter? That would be helpful, yes. Thank you. So turn the grid into a filter. And I think Marilyn has a hand up. Go ahead. Marilyn, you've got, yep.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, we're looking at the situation where we've got in our privacy statement that every 2 years we want to remind people that they're still in our database.
Mm-hmm.
So, currently, we're using a custom export in Excel to check if we can find people with the date, you know, the last time we informed them.
Mm.
Is there any way that maybe the dashboard could also help us in finding those people and make it slightly easier to resend the information email?
Yeah, so obviously there's hyperlinks in here that allow you to open the records to trigger the actions. I think what would help you in that scenario is probably either the ability to search for people whose last event was met certain criteria, or to be able to filter the grid, because in the grid itself, you can take action to update someone's data privacy, right?
Yeah.
And re-trigger a new inform notification.
Exactly.
Is it the date of the last event that you would be using there? The last event.
Yeah, probably connected with, because we don't really work with consent, so it would be the informed. Yeah. So the date
so you
of
just
the last
want to know,
event would be
yeah.
huge help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, make a note of that. Yeah, I think this will help because you can search for the date of the last event. This gives you a list of people. You click on the name of the person, their record opens. You re-inform. But if you're doing that at scale, I can imagine that, especially if you just did, you know, if you did 5,000 or 6,000 2 years ago and they all expire at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, that is something we can take away.
Thanks.
Okay. So let's take a look at this one briefly. I don't know how much time people have got. I can't remember if we scheduled this for 30 minutes or a little longer, but the idea of this data set is to look at people who've changed jobs. You know, you can parse someone's social media profiles or resume, CV, to update their work history. The other kind of common way to do that is to use the position wizard. So you'll notice next to the company here, there is a cross. If I click the cross on their default position, it launches a wizard, and it gives me the option to switch out their current position, make it a previous role, and set the date. And in this case, it defaults to today's date as the end date on that position. So hit next and finish. That blanks out these fields, and I can put their job title and link them to the new company in here. If I can spell. And let's put them at 3M. And that creates a new position with the same start date as the end date for the previous position that we just changed. So a really quick way, especially if you're using our built-in browser and you notice on their social media profile that that their work history is updated, but there's only one position that needs updating in here. Rather than parsing that profile, you can simply use the wizard to update based on the dates that you see in here, right? So, you know, that gives you that ability to build out a change in someone's job history. Now, obviously, we can't load every person in your database into a data set in a dashboard. It simply wouldn't work. It wouldn't perform. So how do we go about then identifying the people whose movements I'm interested in tracking? The prototype I've built leverages programs. So what you do is you might, for instance, take an advanced search and find a load of people that work for certain companies and have certain categories, or you might just be interested in, you know, those who are working in the sales space, right, and in the consumer electronics industry. So we can take all of those people, right mouse, and add them to a program. And what I've built in this particular case then is a dashboard that allows us to select that program, and it will display the movements of those individuals in that program. Just allows us to significantly reduce the amount of data we're having to load. It will only load people who've been added to programs in the last 6 or 12 months to really cut down on the number of people that we're loading in here. And then it shows me the end dates and start dates of the positions, which can be used as filters, but also they've moved to and moved from for the companies. start to get some real insight here from just simply changing and managing the data that you're already doing, in all likelihood, updating someone's work history. But by dropping them into a program, I can come in here and I can select my position tracking program. This just shows me the people in that program. It shows me the companies they've moved from and to. I can see that there are 2 movers from Lightning. If I select that, it shows me that one went to Google, one went to BMC. It shows me who they are. There's hyperlinks in here that allow me to open the person record, the company record of the new company, or the company record of the old company. So, you know, I think a fairly common kind of piece of insight that a lot of you might be tracking manually. Sometimes you spot movers, you build out a list, or you might be running structured searches to try and find this, just a way of visualizing it slightly differently, but also showing you the from and the to and the dates. You might be able to use this to start tracking insights or extracting insights from when you see a spike in certain types of movements. So yeah, I invite some feedback there. As I said, the challenge with a lot of these things is how do we go about building these in a way that they would perform, because we can't simply load a list of everybody in the database. Most databases are exceeding 50,000 people. Some run to 500,000 to 1 million people, but you know, that use of programs in this case is a way of limiting that. But any questions, observations? Is this something that would be useful for us to drop into that analytics, the other analytics article? Anybody, any comments? We'll move on. Okay, go ahead, Marilyn.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think if you connect this to programs, I mean, we're already building programs around people in certain areas. So it'd be interesting to dive deeper into where they're coming from, what the movements there to help us decide, you know, where to focus on first, or see where we need to mine for other people to add to the same interest group.
Yeah, I think, you know, as we start to look at things like this, it's very possible we could build a dedicated program type for building out those lists, and then you can filter the data set to only include people in programs that are of that type. So there's some custom work potentially to apply that level of filtering, but I think, you know, on the surface, you know, sharing this and getting some feedback from you would be probably a fairly useful exercise. So we'll get this uploaded into the other dashboards.
Thanks.
Article.
Yeah, definitely we'll do some experimenting with this with our business development programs. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I planned on talking a little bit about user activity. We've got 2 here. I'll focus on one, and that's just the assignment one. There is, as I said, a default user activity dashboard, and there is individual dashboards for interviews, etc. Oh, Marilyn's hand raised again. Go. Is that another question, or is it?
Sorry, no, that was just me with a cat walking around my keyboard. I do.
Okay. Okay. So, couple of places most activity takes place. One is a program, one is an assignment. So what this particular data set gives us, actually it's 4 separate data sets in this dashboard. We've applied multiple data sets, but we've implemented what's called cross data source filtering. So if I go into edit mode in here, you will see that if I go into create data sources, we've created 4 separate custom data sets in here. This is progress statuses for people in programs. This is the version history of the changes to those statuses. This is the counts of all of the different types of activity in the journal. And this is some information about the opportunities in those programs. And we can filter this data set by any of these values: the program type, the program status, the user taking the action or who is the owner of that program, and the practice, in this case, the record management components. The way cross-data source filtering works is this data has to be in each of those data sets. But that's quite often easier than trying to build one supersized data set that has all of the data in that you want to visualize in this particular dashboard. As I said, we've got version history for status changes. We have the current progress status for people in those programs. We've got the journal activity, and we've got those linked opportunities to these programs. Building one data set that caters for all 4 of those use cases would be quite complex. So all we've done in this particular case is included 4 values in each of those data sets, along with the rest of the information that we want to display. This is something to think about when you're defining requirements for custom dashboards. Is it one supersized data set? Is it multiple? And if it's multiple, what are we going to want to filter by? Because whatever you want to filter by in this dashboard has to be in each of those data sets so that cross-data source filtering works. So in here, in the interactivity thing here, we've turned cross-data source filtering on. And if I came into here, for instance, and turned it on, the fact that an appointment exists in a program is not included in any of the 3 other data sets, so can't be used as a cross-data source filter. So anything you want to filter by has to exist in all 4 data sets if you go down the multiple route. The other way is to build one large data set, in which case, whenever you're applying filters, it'll filter everything. But sometimes easier to get your head around defining 4 smaller data sets and just making sure that you can filter each of them by the same components. Okay.
Sean, there's a question from Rob in the Q&A, just drawing your attention to it. Can this board be created for a specific program?
Well, yeah, the programs in here probably operate as a filter. Yeah. So program name exists in each of the data sets, in which case we can also cross filter by program name. You can switch out one of these widgets at the top or just select the program in the list here. You think it would be more useful or common to search for a specific program than it would, for instance, the status of the program? Because it's fairly easy for us to switch out the filters up here to switch in the name of the program, for instance. So I will, I'll do that. We'll switch out practice and add program name as a filter. And again, if it's kind of useful, I think one thing we need to be mindful of here is there could, for some large databases, for really heavy program use, there could be a large amount of data loading. So again, we might need to apply some filters to these prototypes. Until they become defaults, we won't support them, but we can make them available and maybe give you a bit of a steer around how we can make them more performant if they're a little slow. Okay, so I think the data source queries in here, this is a bit where a lot of people start to come a bit unstuck. You know, we have maybe half a dozen clients who have anyone investing any time in learning about what we call the abstraction layer. The abstraction layer is kind of 160 tables of data that contain lots of different information that's available to all of our reporting solutions. Our Excel add-in, the DevExpress client reports, and the analytics tool all have access to that abstracted layer of data. You need to be able to write a little bit of SQL to be able to join SQL, to join these tables together and build custom data sets yourself. So the reality is that anything beyond our default data sets is likely to require an engagement with a partner who can provide you with some knowledge and expertise to help you deliver something in a fraction of the time you might deliver it yourself. But I think investing some time in investigating that abstraction layer is kind of useful activity up front. If I take this data set here and I jump into Excel, the Excel add-in gives us the ability to add data sources. Let's give it a name, test. And I can just select from this list of tables. This list of tables is outlined in the Help Center article. There's a downloadable file. So I just come in here quickly. There's an article called Reporting. If you scroll to the bottom of that, there's a section in here that talks about the abstraction layer in the Invenias Excel add-in. It's going to take you through the steps to do what I'm about to do. But at the very bottom, there is a downloadable file which documents the names and descriptions of all of the different layers of tables of data in the abstraction layer. So, but in here, I click Manage Data Source. I click Add. I give it Test. And I can select from this list, which corresponds to this list, or I can actually write custom queries in here. So I'm going to paste that query in to this table and click Close. And here you'll see 3 rows of data. This is the opportunities in the top right-hand corner widget, which adds up to 3. Right? So that data set brings through these columns and these rows, and all we've done is visualize that in here. I'm not suggesting that anybody goes out and starts to learn SQL. SQL is probably a better. There are better things you can focus your efforts, energies, and time on. But you know, if you just investigate, want to investigate anything, looking at the list of abstracted layers of tables and just clicking Add, give it a name, and selecting the table that you think might have the data in it, does the same thing. Just loads that table of data so you can see what's in here. Really useful to start to spot where the blanks are. You can use the filters in the tables to see which columns might be blank or apply filters. You can also turn these tables into pivot charts. So you can kind of chart the data in these, start to work out how might we like to visualize the data. There's a lot of data loads, over 10,000 rows of data loading into any of these data sets. The Excel add-in won't let you do it, but you know, so the people view, for instance, won't load in most databases because there's very few, with fewer than 10,000 people in. But the majority of those abstracted layers. So a question here from, Millie, you had a question. You had your hand up. Do you want to ask a question or? Yeah, okay, allowed to talk. Go ahead.
I believe it may have been answered now, but it was going back to the actual dashboard on the programs and the table that says program name. I just wanted to know what information that was pulling in. Is that pulling in, if this lets the user, for example, is that pulling out programs that they are an owner of, or is it pulling out programs that they are active in, so updating?
Yeah, so if you filter by a user, it will only show you the programs they're the owner of. If you decided you wanted to filter by the team tab on a program, that starts to get complicated, but it's possible. It just turns it into a custom data set. Remembering we'd have to join the team from a program to each of the 4 data sets in here. That would then also result in duplicate rows of data, which significantly increases the amount of data loading. So for each team member, we'd need a row of data for each of these items. So instead of, if you had 4 team members on a program, these 3 rows of data would turn into 12 because they'd have to repeat for each team member so that you can filter by that team member. The program list here filters based on the owner of the program, which typically in most cases is the creator of the program, but the user on the other data sets is actually the person that creates, has most recently modified the person in the program, or has most recently changed the version history, or created or is the owner of the journal items. So in different widgets, it means different things. What I'll probably do is upload one of these, either probably the programs one initially, and in the Help Center article explain what the filters are filtering by, what criteria each filter is filtering by, but in the program name column specifically, in this widget here, rather, it's filtering, if you filter by user, it's filtering by the owner of the program.
Would it be possible to change that to similar to what the others are, of ones that they have modified? Modified
by instead of created by?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the modified by on a program in 90% of cases is the creator. Because when you add someone to a program, it doesn't change the modified by. It's only if you change the status of a program or the name of a program and save it that it would update the modified by. It's not impossible to do it. I don't think it would add a lot in most cases, because most people, if they don't want to use the owner of the program, which you can define and is then fixed. So remember, the idea of an owner on a record is it initially shows in the owner field here who created it, but you can redefine it. But this is then fixed rather than constantly changing. The modified by, I would have to make a change to the record and then hit save and close for me to be reflected as the modifier of this record. It's not enough to add someone to a program or change the status of someone in a program to update the modified by. But would the modified by still help?
Well, the way we work, multiple people edit one program, so it would be useful for us to see who is active on one of our programs. But if we have to select an owner every time we modify it, that wouldn't work.
Yeah, so you would select, in that case, the program you're interested in, which would filter all the other widgets. The progress version history here attributes the progress status to the person who most recently changed that status. But in a program, we also have an owner field in the grid. So I haven't got a program open, but in the people list here, this owner field here is something you can again define, and then we could attribute the current progress status to the current owner. I think at the moment it's attributed to the modified by in the grid, which means I last modified the data on this person in this program. The version history is attributed to the person that changed all of the statuses. So yeah, I think I think case of us getting this out to you through that help article, and gathering some feedback. As I said, in a lot of cases it may not work in principle, but there could be some opportunities here for us to kind of extend this to a generic enough data set, and that means we could potentially ship it as a default rather than it having to be a piece of custom work. But speaking to the account managers for your accounts, if you want to make changes to these things, the idea of these prototypes is to trigger some thoughts around what might be useful, rather than providing you with something that will work, but it will then allow you to drive some engagements with our SI partners to accelerate the development of something custom. Anything is possible pretty much through that abstracted layer of data. The problem with a lot of these programs is everybody has different practices, different ways of working, and as a consequence, the development of a default dashboard won't work.
Thank you.
Question from Jamie: is there a documentation to see column names without having to load them into Excel? This document, I don't know whether this is the same version that's in the system or not, but we can upload a version of this. the first column lists out the view, the table, and then if you select a view in here, let's take user's view, for instance. The column E then shows you the columns that will load in that. I don't see any reason why we can't, if it's not already in that document on the reporting module, replace that with this information so you can see the column headers at least. I think it's useful to try and find a way to load the data, but as you say, when you hit that 10,000 record limit in Excel, you then have to be able to write a SQL query to just select 10,000 records, which is a fairly simple process as long as you only need a random. I will put a
Sean, the version of the document in the help article is the one that you've got there, so you can see you can see the columns.
Yep. But in that, I'll update that Help Center article as well. There's an SQL statement where you can select the top 10,000 records, and it just selects the first 10,000. Or we can just select a sample, right? I'll include that as a SQL query to use that rather than selecting the table from the grid. What if instead of just selecting the table from the grid, you use the custom query and you type the select statement in here. But I'll put a copy of a select statement where you can load a sample. Target question from Rob about targets. Not at the moment. We don't have the dashboard has functionality to display targets, but we have nowhere in the product to store them. And there's no consensus across our customer base when we talk about targets as to what people are being targeted against and how individuals are being targeted. So at the moment, no. Most of our customers that have requirements to measure actual against target use the Excel add-in and bring the data into Excel rather than dashboards. And then inside Excel, you combine the data using the add-in with a table of data that has the targets. The analytics tool that we use only allows you to select a single source of data, and that is Invenias. So until we have a home for targets, which would require us to achieve consensus for what targets would need to look like, it won't be possible for us to put targets in analytics. But it has been done by a few clients with custom work in the Excel add-in, using the Excel add-in and combining it with a table of data that shows the targets. Okay, so we're on the hour. Great session, fantastic feedback. Does anybody else have any other questions for now? A few actions on me to update a few things in some of those prototypes, and we'll get those loaded into that other dashboards Help Center article. But whilst you've got us, anybody else got any other questions? This recording be also on the Help Center. Yes, I think the plan is the marketing team has set up the process of emailing out the link afterwards. We'll drag down a recording and stick it into a Help Center article as well. So yeah, we'll make sure that that is available in Help, but should be coming out in an automated email of some description from the marketing team too. No more questions? Fabulous. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Look forward to receiving feedback from you as you start to kind of investigate some of those other dashboards. And, you know, as always, feel free to fire any questions you might have at me, sean.wilkes@invenias.com. But yeah, I'll let you all get back to your day. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sean. That was great.
Yep.
Cheers,
Thanks,
everybody.
Sean.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.